The wider world is part of the Unit 3 exam, and we're going to run through some of the main topics. However, we need to think about the impact of social and economic context on the success or failure of a business. Some of these questions are difficult because there are grey areas. So when we're thinking of longer questions, we might write an "it depends" conclusion. So it depends means there may not be a right answer. You give a positive point and negative point and then say, overall, it depends on that particular business. You might think that ethical questions are really easy. However, fashion retailers have been confused of using cheap labour known as sweatshops in other countries. Pressure groups have put enormous pressure on these shops to act more ethically. However, if the customers of business say they just want cheap clothes, meaning that their main customer need is price, the customer might not care about the ethics of the business. But it's not that simple, because the business might have to take into account the pressure group, who may generate negative publicity, meaning in the long term there will be less customers of that particular retail store. So the business has to consider all the possible different viewpoints, and it depends. There's no particular right answer. Environmental matters are important to businesses. Not just the short-term environmental effects like air, noise and water pollution, but the long-term effects like global warming. As ever, if it matters to any particular business depends on that business. Perhaps the size of it, but certainly their customer needs. When we're thinking about longer questions, you also might need to think about whether this is more relevant to developed or developing countries. International trade is really important. This means that some businesses have taken the decision to move manufacturing from the UK to China to cut down on costs, for example, wage costs. This then puts pressure on local governments, like the UK government, to try to protect jobs. They could do this through import protection. So this might be an import tax on products, which would make the imports more expensive and encourage local UK businesses to produce those products in the UK rather than just import them. Governments can also encourage production of certain products through export subsidy. This is basically the government paying businesses extra over and above the sale price for products they export. Businesses are concerned about regulation. There are benefits to the business for this. Workers get paid an amount of holiday or sick pay, and health and safety legislation protects employees. But overall, these employee protections also encourage employers not only to look after their employees, but to start to think about them as long-term investments. So you're encouraged, if you think someone's going to stick around, to pay more for training. And that means that the employer is more likely to have better staff over time, not having such high staff turnover, having to employ more and more people as the old ones leave, and to be just more stable. And so in the long term, you're looking at a more successful business. The EU has meant European-wide regulation. This has made importing and exporting goods easier, since you don't need to have to cope with different health and safety rules in each country in Europe, for example. The EU also means that people can move and work to any country in the EU, and goods and services can move and be sold with freedom. This means no tariffs or taxes for selling in the EU, and that really helps businesses within the EU because you have a larger market. However, extra regulation businesses don't like, as it might increase costs. Does this mean that businesses like or dislike the EU? Well, it really depends on the business. If you're a local UK business, you might not appreciate any extra regulation. If you're importing and exporting, you might appreciate the fact there are no extra taxes for doing so. So to sell something in France is as easy as the UK. There is no right or wrong answer. It's an "it depends" answer.